Today we're at the Bluebird house and we're talking plumbing materials, specifically PEX or cross-linked polyethylene. So let's get into it. Copper is really the consistent choice for most houses, and it's been used for generations to plumb the potable water system in houses. It is the water or the pipe that delivers the drinkable water, the water that we bathe with, we drink, we cook, that goes through our water heaters. But it's really a highly expensive material in that it's also used for electrical systems in our houses, and it's becoming more and more difficult to get copper. It's really recycled a lot, but it's also very expensive. And when you're using copper throughout a house, it can get to be very expensive. So Europe has been using a material that's called PEX or cross-linked polyethylene. And if you're not familiar with polyethylene is the same material that gallon jug milk containers come in. So it's a plastic that's been used to hold food for generations and maybe longer than I've been alive. The idea with PEX is that you take the standard polyethylene, which is a carbon-based plastic molecule, and you do what's called cross-link it, which means you give it more bonds between different molecules. And what that does is it makes it much more stable. Now PEX behind me, this is called a central manifold. And what this means is that the hot water comes into us through this pipe that comes into the top of this manifold. And you can't see the pipe because it's covered in insulation. But on the other side of this wall, we have a tankless water heater that's on the outside of the building. So we have 3 feet of pipe, which is a minimum from the manufacturer of this manifold, that goes into this manifold. So we have a very short distance between where the water comes out of the water heater and goes into this manifold. Once it goes into this manifold, we have a hot side indicated by the red and we have a cold side indicated by the blue. So the cold water comes in from the main water line in the house, and the hot comes in from the water heater, which is also fed by the main water line into the input of the hot water heater. So we have both temperatures, and each one of these lines corresponds to a different pipe that's delivering water to fixtures around the house. So for instance, right here, we have the kids' vanity. So the bathroom upstairs has a vanity, and the vanity has a hot water line and a cold water line. By using this key, which is right here, you can literally turn off the water line to that vanity from here. So if somebody's using it, I can literally just turn these keys and turn that water off. So now if we needed to replace that water heater, that vanity fixture, we could do that because the water's off. Now I'm going to turn it back on just in case somebody wants to use that today. But the point is that you have infinite control of your water from this manifold. Now this manifold is actually a really great way to not only run all your water back to one fixture so that you have infinite control of the fixtures in the house, but if you ever have a plumbing problem, you can shut off one portion of the house, just one fixture, and the rest of the house functions. No other plumbing system in a house will allow you to have that kind of functionality. Now this is called a central core plumbing system. And I really love the central core because it gives you that flexibility. The PEX material, which is actually a material that basically functions the same as copper, except PEX is flexible. And it's also very inexpensive. So we can buy a whole 100-foot roll of PEX for the same amount of dollars it costs to buy about 20 or 15 feet of copper pipe. The additional thing about PEX is that PEX is about 1,000 times more insulative than copper is. So it's going to lose 1,000th the amount of heat that copper will as hot water runs through that line. And lastly, because PEX is so cheap, we can run a home run to every fixture, giving us that control from the central core system. And when we run PEX in really small lines, because you only need to run the size of pipe to that fixture that fixture can accommodate. So in California, we have consistent water restrictions. That means that our plumbing fixtures don't use as much water as they do in places that have a ton of water, like Michigan or something. And so on, for instance, a vanity fixture, that vanity fixture can only run 1.6 gallons per minute, which means that these pipes can be sized so that they have to run a maximum of 1.6 gallons per minute. So we can typically run 3/8" lines to fixtures where a normal copper run would have to be 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch. And a normal copper run is called a branch and twig. And we're showing an overlay of that right now. And because that one copper line feeds not only the vanity, but also feeds the shower and the toilet, it has to be sized so that it can operate all of those fixtures at the same time. That means that it's a lot larger. Now imagine if we're talking about a hot water line. If you have a hot water line, you have to fill that entire line with hot water before you'll get water to that fixture. And that's a problem in that if you want to just use a little bit of hot water to, say, wash your hands, you have to evacuate or move all of the cold water that used to be in that hot water line. You have to move all of that into the drain before you get even a little bit of hot water. That's a really bad use of water, because now all that water is going down the drain, and now you've filled the entire line with hot water even if you're only going to use a little bit of it. And now when that hot water is in that line, it's going to cool over time as it loses heat to the environment. So not only are you using, on the branch and twig system, you're using a lot more water, you're running a lot more water down the drain, and you're letting a lot more hot water sit in the pipes as it cools after you've used it. With the home run system and with the PEX system, you're actually not doing that, because you're only having to evacuate a much, much smaller pipe, which may have a fifth of the volume of a larger pipe, to get hot water. So you're using less water to go down the drain before you get the hot water. And you're also using a much more insulative material, which means that hot water is going to stay hotter in the line before it gets to you. And it's also going to cool down a lot faster, or a lot slower. So it's going to actually be a much better piping material. Again, PEX is also cheaper for the material and installation. Because PEX is flexible, you don't have to put a bunch of joints in it, which means that the amount of time it takes to install PEX in a house is a fraction of what it is to install copper. And in fact, when I originally built this house, I ran all these PEX lines, and it took me about 8 hours to run all the PEX lines for the entire house. So dramatic cost savings in installation, a dramatic cost savings in material, much better control, more insulative, and incredibly stable. So here's an example of green building that really makes sense. We're not only saving money in installation, we're saving money in material costs, we're saving time in not having to wait for hot water, because we're having to waste less water down the drain. And we're being more efficient with the hot water that we use. This isn't always the case. And, we can do different designs. Every house has a different layout, and every house has to be considered differently on how you lay out those plumbing fixtures, and specifically the hot water circulation. And we are now, because California is under constant drought, we are now going away from this central core type of plumbing fixture, and we're actually going to an even more water efficient system called a recirculation system. And we'll talk about a recirculation system in future videos. If you're interested in learning more about green building, learning more about our projects, or following along, or interested in building science, please hit subscribe as we show you how to build a better way.